¿Cómo negocias con alguien que no cree en la negociación como los talibanes? ¿Qué se siente ser parte de la historia en tiempo real sabiendo que un mal cálculo puede cambiar el destino de millones de personas? Hoy nos acompaña alguien que vivió esto en primera fila, alguien que vio la aceleración repentina de la historia y tuvo que salir de su patria, de indomables montañas, de paisajes alucinantes, una tierra de cultura, epicentro y cementerio de muchos imperios, Afganistán. Muchos creen que la guerra de Afganistán terminó cuando los Estados Unidos se retiraron de este país en el 2021, pero ¿realmente terminó? Tengo el honor de tener como invitado especial en esta primera entrevista que ofrecemos a todos nuestros queridos seguidores a Shoaib Rahim. Shoaib fue alcalde de Kabul, la capital de Afganistán, y asesor principal del Ministerio de Estado para la Paz. Ha tenido varios cargos en el sector público y participó en las negociaciones entre el gobierno afgano y los talibanes. Hoy se desempeña virtualmente como profesor asociado en la Universidad Americana de Afganistán y reside en Toronto, Canadá, donde ha estado vinculado con la Escuela Monk de Asuntos Globales y Política Pública de la Universidad de Toronto. Shoaib, it's a pleasure to have you here in my channel. I hope your experience, your life experience, your experience in Afghanistan can help our Latin American audience to understand better our world, its dynamics, and all these things that are happening in the last years. But it's so difficult to understand for us. Where we feel we are far away from the rest of the world. But your experience, I think, can help us open our mind and understand that the world it's much more complex than we think. And the experience you had in Afghanistan can help us understand ourselves also. So welcome, Shoaib. It's a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you very much for inviting me, Juan. It's an absolute honor to be speaking with you today. And I hope that I can answer the questions to the liking, to your liking, and to the audience's liking. And hopefully, from this conversation, we can learn a little bit more about our common experience and make better decisions from what we
Okay.
have learned.
I have a first strange question. Be prepared. Uh, just imagine this. You are relaxing in your home after a long day at work. You leave your coat in the hanger, and as you walk into the living room, you see a strange, round figure. And as you turn on the light, it's Donald Trump having a cup of tea in your living room. How would you react to this?
I'll probably kick him out of the house. Yeah, I don't think I have the patience to entertain him in my home. Unfortunately, Donald Trump stirs so much negative emotions that it might become very difficult for me in that imaginary scenario to contain myself. I think his erratic behavior has harmed millions of lives globally and continues to threaten millions of lives. And the fact that he is able to mask his erratic decision making under the guise of ending wars and making peace and saving lives, I think is simply ridiculous. I think he's an extremely irresponsible person. Me and my family and my generation have lost much and lost a great deal because of what this individual has done and set up. So that's not a very pleasant scenario you put me in, but that would be my response.
I guess so. I knew it. You have been living in Canada for a few years already. So I would like to try to close your eyes and try to imagine something. What do you see when you imagine yourself in Kabul 10 years ago? What's going on in the streets? What are your experiences? Try to remember this and tell our audience, how did you feel? How were the smells, the sounds? How was Afghanistan 10 years ago?
That's a great question. So, 10 years ago was 2015, and 2015, Kabul was a city full of hope, was a city full of life, and was a city which was extremely resolved and committed to continuing the struggle to improve and to make better the lives of each other, because a few things had happened at that point. The first thing was that the security responsibility of the war was transitioned from the international forces to the Afghanistan National Army, from starting from 2014, and our army was, which is a volunteer army, was fighting bravely, and so there was a very strong sense of pride in our national army as a symbol of unity. The second thing was that we just passed a very dangerous presidential elections, which was contested heavily, and it pushed us to the brink of civil war between the various parties in the government.
Mhm.
But that was resolved through a formation of a national unity government, so people became very optimistic. And the last thing was that in 2015, a young generation was finally being absorbed into decision-making positions in the public sector, in the private sector. So we were going through this transformation, intergenerational transformation. And so naturally, with that comes a lot of hope, comes a lot of positivity, and comes a lot of constructive energy. And so I think 2015 was a very, very good time
Yeah.
in my mind.
In Latin America, people think about Afghanistan as a they perceive Afghanistan as a country of war, which is ironic. Having our Colombian experience and Latin American experience, where we know what is war, civil war, also. But I would like to go farther. I would like to not just to speak about war when we speak about Afghanistan. What could you say about Afghanistan's culture, art, and its music? What is something that you miss from Afghanistan and that many people don't know about your country?
Well, that's what you said is applicable to most countries and most people around the world because of the media coverage of Afghanistan, unfortunately. But Afghanistan used to be a very famous tourist destination in the 50s and 60s. It was very famous for being a part of the hippie trail. People used to drive from Germany through Turkey, Iran, and the destination was Afghanistan to sit at the foot of the Buddha statue. And we have amazing, fantastic climate. We have great food, four seasons, and we had very big music concerts. So people used to fly in from the region to attend music festivals in Afghanistan. And so we were known as this cultural hub uh, during the 60s as well as the 70s, up until the Soviet invasion of 79, when things started becoming spiraling towards conflict. But what I miss most, what I miss most, of course, from Kabul is the food. I would say the food is very difficult to find, and we're very proud of our food. And every country is proud of their food, of course, but in Afghanistan, we're particularly proud of our food, and our fresh baked breads, which you get every single day before a meal, and the culture of listening to live music. Friends get together, and at the worst of times, at the most stressful, most despaired day, all you need to do is just get together around a good meal and some music, and you get ready to continue the next day.
Yeah.
So that's what I suppose I miss the most.
Okay, okay, that's interesting. I remember being in the South Tajikistan and seeing from far away Afghanistan and all these beautiful mountains. Also, I think you have a country where nature is also so splendid. You have some of the biggest mountains in the world. You're a crossroads of culture, of music, of ideas, of philosophers. You were the center of some huge empires in antiquity and in Middle Ages. So for sure, your food should show some of this like mixture of cultures and products for sure. Mm, Obviously, Afghanistan has changed a lot since the Soviet invasion in '79 and all um, the following situations and wars you had. When did you first realize that politics isn't just a set of ideas, but something that can mark the life of people? When did you realize that you could do something with it?
So I was born during the Soviet invasion, and so I was raised in an environment which was extremely politicized, and my generation suffered from the poor decision making of political leaders in my country. And so we did not have the luxury to look the other way. We did not have the luxury of not caring about politics. And we in my generation, and myself, unfortunately, are cursed with being politicized at every turn. And that realization happened at a very young age because you are not in your home, you are not in your country, you do not have the same status, the same access to amenities as the people around you, and you realize that the reason is because, well, this is not your country, and you start asking as a child, what does that mean? What is a country? I'm just a 6 year old, 7 year old. Oh, your country is that other country over there. You don't belong here. And so you realize that politics, if handled by irresponsible folks,
Yeah.
becomes extremely detrimental to the masses.
Mhm.
And unfortunately, we have had, and this might apply to many around the world, but we have had the misfortune of having leaders who ended up eventually abusing the public trust. Um, uh, Power corrupted them, and the frustration of society eventually led to people giving up. So it's an uphill battle. So politics is a dirty game, is the saying. If you enter politics, you have to be able to make deals and not be honest, and that's the general perception. But unfortunately, in a country which experiences conflict for long periods, it becomes very difficult to convince people to change their ways. And
Yeah.
so I think my generation is one that has realized that unless you are able to correct the political class and the political elite, who will make decisions at the top of the structure, then it becomes very difficult to make meaningful change elsewhere.
That's so true and so relevant for the things, the changes we're seeing around the world, in the US, in Canada, in almost any country in the world. This irresponsibility of many politicians uh, who choose some paths that end badly and that can have a decisive and terrible consequence in the people in the life of the people. In your opinion, according to what you told me, when was there a moment in which Afghanistan had a real chance to change the course of its recent history?
So there are a few moments, I would say. My first response to that question would be that um, my generation, and I will speak a lot of my generation
Mhm.
because this is the common understanding and perception, and which I also adhere to, feels like we missed the opportunity that we had in the past 20 years, where we had the international community essentially coming and lending us a hand to help rebuild our country. And I know there's the war on terror and the violence aspect of it, but internally, for a population of 35 million, we had the world at our doorstep, at our footstep. We had been given the resources and the access to genuinely make a change, but unfortunately, we were either too naive
Mhm.
collectively or too short-sighted to use
Mhm.
that opportunity for our own growth, and we eventually were too fragmented to be able to utilize our opportunity. So that would be my first response.
Okay.
Secondly, I think that there were many opportunities to end the war or end the conflict with the Taliban, although many would argue that the Taliban had no agency. They were
Mhm.
simply puppets of politics from our either southern or western neighbors, Pakistan and
Yeah.
Iran. There's a lot of involvement that they have. There's a lot of proxy wars that were triggered and driven by them. So some people might dispute this, but along the 20 years, there were opportunities to bring the Taliban into the government, and they were willing. But the
Okay.
Americans did not allow it,
Mhm.
especially in the early years. They were like, they lost, we don't care. They're not, they should not be on board. And then fast forward 20 years, the Americans, Trump essentially, um, decided to directly speak with the Taliban, bypass a partner of 20 years who you have
Yeah.
signed security agreements and alliances with, and then forced a peace process
Mhm.
on us. And so we were put in a very difficult position
Mhm.
where people were like, okay, so do you say no to peace? Are you actually saying no to the opportunity to end this war? Is this because you're being selfish? Is this because you have an agenda? You want to control power, remain in power? Or is there something legitimate to it? So this was the constant discussion that was happening during the Doha deal and the Doha conversations.
Mhm.
And so, unfortunately, the political class and society as a whole was not able to really capture the moment and make the best of that opportunity,
Yeah.
despite the fact that the Taliban were insincere, despite the fact that the Taliban were not genuine. But there would have been a scenario where we could have had a much better outcome than
Yeah.
the reality we are in today.
That makes me think about something I read and I heard some years ago. It was a speech of Gabriel Garcia Marquez, our Colombian Nobel Prize, Literature Nobel Prize. And I will explain you why. In an op-ed from 2023, you discuss how Afghanistan people, Afghan people, lost their control of their own war, and Afghans were effectively abandoned by the previous strategic allies and the international aid. In Colombia and in Latin America, we have suffered something similar with Gabriel Garcia Marquez actually commenting how the colonial legacy and the current dependence on other superpowers have left us alone. I think we have a common experience in feeling ourselves alone or left alone. Given this shared experience, how do you think we, Afghans and Latin Americans, can find our voice and our trace in this world, which I think is so complicated and don't leave us like a space for uh, for making the other big powers hear our opinions and our decisions.
So you're pointing to a very, very important issue here, Juan. I think that it starts with a sense of ownership. It
Mhm,
starts with acknowledging individually and then collectively as a society that we are responsible for the good and the bad that happens in our society and in our country. Unfortunately, many societies don't have such an understanding of the world around them, including Afghanistan. So it starts with a sense of ownership. Once you have established that sense of ownership, then I think it's very important, and we have learned this the hard way. Afghanistan has learned this the hard way. You realize that nobody owes you anything.
mhm,
Nobody will be here to help you during your bad days. Nobody will be here to solve problems for you, and nobody has to help you. If they do, then that's a good situation. We will be thankful, we will be grateful,
mhm,
but we should never be dependent on others to solve our problems. Now, this might be easier said than done. I agree. Now, you mentioned the colonial legacy of Latin America. I understand that, but I think the colonial legacy, the analogy to Afghanistan would be we were we historically we fought three wars against the British Empire, and then the Soviet War, and then the American and NATO involvement in Afghanistan.
yeah,
Unfortunately, we as a society um, lacked a sense of ownership. We said, "Oh, whatever the big powers decide will happen in Afghanistan.
yeah,
We don't matter. We don't have agency." And so when a society decides that, it becomes very difficult to lead.
mhm,
It becomes very difficult to mobilize. It becomes very difficult to introduce change.
mhm,
And you end up with a political class that simply wants access to foreign embassies and derive their legitimacy from foreign capitals outside your country. You don't get your legitimacy from the people. And so that
mhm,
creates a very tricky situation
mhm,
because it puts people in a difficult bind. People will be like, "Hey, okay, let's say it's a presidential elections. Let's say there are three candidates, and the people will say, 'Oh, I will vote for the candidate who has the best access to Washington or
mhm,
to London
mhm,
or to Moscow or to Beijing, depending on the country.' Even if that person is not qualified or has ideologies that might not sit well with you.
yeah.
And so the people give up their sense of agency and their right to choose their own destiny. And in that situation, it's a losing battle. It becomes very, very difficult. So unless we find a way to revive that,
Mhm,
I think it's an uphill battle to
mhm.
bring any meaningful social or political change.
Okay. Now, nowadays, when we see what's going on in the world, obviously we don't speak that much about Afghanistan. We speak about Ukraine. Yeah, it seems to me that Donald Trump's recent attitude towards Ukraine, it's very similar, mimics his past behavior and his decision making to withdraw from Afghanistan, which many view as a betrayal. Myself, actually. And in a recent published article, you mentioned that Trump has a playbook that he follows in the international conflicts, which can be narrowed down to giving everything the other side requests and then walking away. Do you think this playbook that you describe in your article is a representation of his personal style or a real strategy of the American establishment? Because sometimes we, as Latin Americans, we want to understand Is this just an exception, or is the rule what we're seeing in the US and in this new betrayal we're like seeing in Ukraine? What is your opinion about that?
I think that's a valid question. I think that if we look at the U.S. track record in major conflicts in the past century, um, uh, let's say you start with Vietnam, and then look at Afghanistan, and then other conflicts such as Ukraine. Let's just highlight these three, for example. I think this cut and run strategy has unfortunately manifested at some point in time in one shape or form. But Trump specifically adds his own flavor to this.
Mhm.
So in the article, I and a colleague, Professor Ed Schatz, what we tried to portray was a psychological motive
Mhm.
of Trump, because he is such a larger than life character. He does not believe in institutional legitimacy. He does not believe in bureaucracy. He does not believe in collective movement. He just believes in himself and what he feels that day, or what his base or whoever he chooses to believe at that point in time. And so, what we're trying to point to is that Trump in Ukraine, um, Trump simply doesn't care about Ukraine. That's very obvious. He's made it obvious. He did not care about Afghanistan. No one's asking him to care about Afghanistan. This is not anymore. We're talking about real politics here, right? We're talking about
Mhm.
strategy. So you're like, okay, so what is it that you want? What is American interest in Afghanistan? How did you define that? And now, how do you define American interest in Ukraine? Who decides what is U.S. interest in another conflict that you are fueling and you are funding? And so, I think the playbook kind of points to the fact that he's an extremely poor negotiator. He does not know how to. What has he achieved? He just
Mhm.
gives everything up and walks away. He did that in Afghanistan. I mean, if Biden, let's say Biden didn't win the election, if Trump had a round two, it would have ended up the same. He already gave everything to the Taliban.
Mhm.
And he's giving everything to Putin in Ukraine. Again, we don't know how it's going to end. We're in the thick of it. The negotiations are still happening. But the rumor as of today, apparently, is that he has lost interest. He's looking for the next thing, next
Yeah.
conflict around the world. So that erratic nature is unfortunately moving the largest economy and the largest military in the world, which is very scary.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of what we were trying to allude to in the article, and essentially what the world is seeing is that you simply cannot rely on not just Trump. You cannot rely on the U.S. administration's promises,
Mhm.
and that creates a new global dynamic. Okay, so what do you do? How do you play this? How do you play this game internationally? And so I think we're going to enter some uncharted territory when it comes to these issues.
I agree. I agree on that. In our channel, people that follow us come from all over the world. We have Mexicans, Argentinians, Chileans, Colombians, but many of the people are Colombians. In Colombia, we negotiated with armed groups for decades, um, which was something very difficult. Yeah, people from the government try to negotiate with some groups with very difficult opinions and ways of seeing life, which I think you have a similar experience with the Taliban. What advice would you give to the Colombian society, which is frustrated by the profound difficulty of reaching an agreement on seemingly common issues like peace in our country?
Well, look, the Colombian conflict is extremely complicated, just like any other conflict, just like Afghanistan's conflict, and it has very unique characteristics. But I think the experience, at least that I had when I was in Doha in the direct negotiations with the Taliban, I was a part of the delegation. Is that it's very similar. You're speaking to people who don't agree on the ABCs.
Yeah.
Like you're trying to find a common language. Like, how do you communicate with somebody who is doesn't trust you, one, B, considers you as the enemy,
Mhm.
and C, has every single motivation and incentive to harm you.
Mhm.
So it's like banging your head against a wall. What
Yeah.
happens? And so you're there, and you have to make it work. If
Mhm.
you stop attempting and trying, you go back to the fighting and killing.
Mhm.
The death toll and the lives lost is the price that you pay, and so it becomes extremely difficult. And what I found was that it is it is necessary to find it is necessary to find common ground,
Mhm.
even if you are labeled, and you will be labeled, even if you are labeled as somebody who is foregoing their position and their interests. So the negotiator's job is very difficult,
Yeah.
because negotiators from both sides will be criticized by their own people,
Mhm.
because they're like, you gave up too much.
Yeah.
We're not going to accept this, and this is a bad deal,
Mhm.
right? So they say a great deal is characterized by one that equally frustrates all parties. That is the best deal you can get. And so it is very difficult to negotiate, particularly in a situation where you have been fighting with another side for decades,
Mhm.
and they
Yeah.
don't care, and they will keep on throwing bodies at this, and they will very easily go back to violence.
Mhm.
And so it is extremely delicate, but it requires sacrifice. And if you are not ready, and by you, I don't mean as the individual, if society is not ready, then the conflict will continue.
Okay.
So, because if you're not talking, you're fighting.
Yeah. Shoaib, what remains behind for you in Afghanistan, in like politically and personally?
So I am recovering from the loss,
Mhm.
to be very honest. It's as somebody who was involved in public office. I was involved in the defense sector for many years, and then I was involved in Kabul in city politics. I was deputy mayor and mayor. I served on the national cabinet. The mayor of the capital sits on the cabinet. I was involved in the political talks. And then we lost everything. Our army crumbled, our government and structure crumbled, and the Taliban took over. And so right now, um, my entire family, my relatives, my loved ones, I still consider it home. I mean, I'm restarting a new life in Canada, but you cannot take away your roots.
Yeah.
I am involved in trying to raise awareness against the atrocities, and the terrorist and criminal behavior of the Taliban against the people. I'm trying to educate the world on what happened in Afghanistan. We had a very dark period in the late 90s when the Taliban were first in power, because there was no access to media, no access to information, and that led to mass killings, and that led to atrocities beyond what one can imagine. In this day and age of information, every single person with a conscience tries to essentially shed light on what is happening inside. And so that's the role that I'm trying to play by raising awareness and educating as much as I can, but also staying involved, with activists, with human rights defenders, with people in the political space. There are a lot of people who care deeply about Afghanistan, people from Afghanistan as well as others who were involved. And we're going to continue this struggle. We have seen so much turnover politically in the past, I'd say 40 years,
Yeah.
that it's almost a given that the Taliban will go.
Mhm.
It's almost a given. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when,
Okay.
right? So there's a lot of activity in preparing for
Mhm.
what happens post Taliban, or what happens when we have a different reality on the ground. So that's where I am.
Okay. Shoaib, let's change to something lighter, maybe. Uh, I want
Please.
to ask, to ask you three strange questions. First, what historical figure would you go clubbing with?
I was never actually. I will not. I'm not going to admit this on. I'm not going to admit this in an interview, but I was never too big in clubbing. But I don't know.
Mhm.
I think. I think maybe Mandela would be good. He would be a great wingman, I think, if you
Yeah.
go clubbing.
And who was your childhood idol? You had one?
So for my generation, one of the idols that we had was Commander Ahmad Shah Massoud, who fought the Soviets.
Hmm.
And he's renowned as the Afghan Napoleon, basically. And so he is somebody who inspired courage among many of his fellow countrymen. And so I would name him. But again, like any conflict, people would have different opinions. But I would name Ahmad Shah Massoud as an idol
Okay.
growing up.
And if Kabul was a movie, which genre would it be?
Ah, it would be a divine comedy, I suppose, or a tragedy. I don't know. We are a very warm-blooded people.
Mhm.
I think that's one of the common traits that I see, at least with anyone who I have met from Latin America. Very warm-blooded, very hospitable, and we really try to enjoy the time we have together. And so I wouldn't want to call it a tragedy, but maybe, with some light humor and comedy now and then. But it's definitely going to be a movie worth watching, to say the least.
Okay, I'm sure. I'm sure of it. I have one last question because I would really like people, like younger people, to hear you. And when you're young, you think of many things, but sometimes reality just knocks on your door and just changes everything. If you could go back in time and talk to the 25-year-old Shoaib Rahim, what advice would you give him?
Don't be so naive. That's the that's the advice I would give, because I feel I took many risks when I was 24, 25. I left everything to go back to Afghanistan, and I had nothing in Afghanistan. And so I don't regret any decision that I've made, but I think that this gullible nature that I had, and many had, in terms of believing many of the things that we were told, I think that hurt us at the end of the day. So be a bit distrustful, be a bit suspicious, but don't let it take away your light. Don't let it make you an unhopeful person. Be hopeful, push for a better future, but don't be naive. Don't be blind to realities.
Okay. Well, Shoaib, that's all for today. It was a real pleasure to talk with you today and inaugurate this space with someone like you. Thank you for your time and insights on the international politics. And I know our viewers will have learned from your experience. We, as I told you, we share many similar experiences, and we hope to have you again in this channel. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me. I've never been to South America, but I've heard lovely, great things about Colombia specifically. So I hope to have the opportunity to visit and meet any of the audience who might be interested at some point in time. It's been an honor to speak with you today. Thank you so much, Juan.
Thank you. You're always welcome in Colombia and in Latin America. Y para nuestra audiencia hispanohablante, pues este es el fin de la entrevista. Espero que les haya gustado este nuevo espacio en el que traeremos a historiadores, filósofos, pensadores, analistas como Shoaib, que nos pueden dar luces para desentrañar el mundo moderno y conocer perspectivas más allá de las que nos venden los medios tradicionales. Ustedes saben que esto es algo fundamental para nuestro canal, fundamental para nuestro trabajo de divulgación histórica. Y si les ha gustado esto, recuerden suscribirse, es gratis a este canal para no perderse las siguientes entrevistas o contenidos. Y si les gustó, pues denle un like, háganle clic a la campanita y esperen todas las nuevas entrevistas que tenemos preparadas para ustedes. Les va a encantar. Esta es la historia contada con pasión y vivida con emoción. Chao, chao.